Good morning, dear listener. Now, I'm hoping against hope that you'll be viewing this not in the gallery format, that is Pat and I side by side, but me dominating, and then Pat gets his period of domination as well. Would that strike you as a reasonable balance of things, Pat? Or do you want to be on the screen the whole time?
Oh, absolutely. No, no, with my charm, good looks, and whatever else, I should be on the screen all the time. I should be in Hollywood. County down.
Aye, Hollywood County Down.
Yeah.
Well, we've got loads to talk about today, and then some on top of that. And the obvious one to start
Yeah.
with, I think, is the situation in Ballymena. Ballymena. I'm trying to remember what Ballymena stands for. It's the town of the something, and I can't think what it is.
Uh,
Anyway, Ballymena, they've been doing an awful lot of rioting, and then there's a lot of little sub-stories running alongside that. What's your sort of immediate reaction to the rioting over the last 3 or 4 days, Pat?
Jude, I don't know what to make of it. You know, and I love this thing. Somebody made the point the other day, and I thought it was a fair point. Like, Jeffrey Donaldson has been charged. No, he's not been found guilty of anything, so let's get that on the record. But nobody ordered a riot. Two young fellas are allegedly involved. So there's all this sort of red. This is the cat. This was allegedly the catalyst for all this.
Hmm.
So Jude, the thought struck me is, they're trying to say, "Hey, we want to protect our women and women and young women and our children."
Yeah.
And these people attack women and children. Jude, I think there's a latent racism there, and it's not that latent. It's in fact quite
I,
overt racism.
oh yeah,
Dude,
yeah.
they didn't want Catholics. They didn't want Catholics in place. They don't want blacks in the place. They don't want foreigners in the place. They want to go. Somebody had made the mistake on actually saying on there, I would like Ballymena to go back to how it was in the 1970s. What's that tell you? Oh, wait.
Well, it's actually maybe people speaking the truth. That's what they believe. They would rather have it as was in the 1970s.
Yeah,
And I mean, don't forget there are people who would wish that Ireland was Ireland of the 1950s. Uh, but that
yeah.
thing about saying that the two young guys charged with the rape were using a Romanian interpreter. Do you think that was a good detail to put in or not?
No, Jude, see, here's the a minute. I think it was Monday night. I heard on BBC, uh, the two guys said the two teenagers pleaded not guilty as to an interpreter. Right away, you say, "Oh, wait a minute, they're not local.
Hmm.
That means they're foreigner." And then it
Hmm.
turns out they're Roman. But anyway, there's I can't remember his first name. I think it's Tommy Gaston, is it, or Gaston the TEV? He
Yeah.
came out and says, "Look, this was inevitable." The people's, and he's got a point here, certainly. He says people's concerns about immigration have been ignored for years, and so on, so on. But then, as I think it was Owen Tennyson, who's the deputy leader of the Alliance Party, he made the point. Well, that's just part of the problem, because that's sort of justifying, what happened. The problem is, like, Jude, Letterkenny. I am from Letterkenny, and if you walk down the street, there's a hell of a lot of foreigners. The town that I grew up in is very much changed. But Jude,
Hmm.
that doesn't give people a right to come out and riot. Doesn't.
Oh, well,
There's ways of addressing things, and particularly good ways. Yeah, people can make peaceful protests. Go down to their local MP or TD or whoever it happens to be. Go to the town hall, get a petition together, and say, "Look, we are concerned about the growing number of immigrants." There's ways to. Jude, you don't throw petrol bombs and
hmm.
bash in people's doors and attack totally innocent people.
If you want publicity, you do. But Pat,
Yeah,
my point would be this. You say there's ways there's a lot of people of foreign extraction in Letterkenny, and that there's ways of expressing your concern. What would your concern be? I mean, everywhere changes. There's change of all kinds. You've motorways and
yeah.
bypasses, and people die in younger generation, and people come in and people leave. Why do we focus in on the immigrants?
Yeah, Jude, well, Bob Dylan wrote a long time ago, "I pity the poor immigrant." Jude, have you seen some of the stuff that was written about the Irish in London and in New York back in the 1800s? You
Yeah.
know, we, Jude, what is it, Germany? In the 1930s, about the Jews and all, you always point to the other as the source of all your ills.
uh,
If you
uh,
can't get a job, oh, it's that fucking foreigner taking my
yeah,
job.
yeah.
If you can't get a hospital appointment, I look at whatever, it's that foreigner and all the rest.
Mm.
They're getting better houses than us. They're getting more dole. Look, they even buying in his car. You hear all this stuff. Urban myths, Jude. A whole lot of it is urban myths. Like a lot of, if you check out what the immigrants are getting in terms of money, it's very, very little, and so on. And I notice in Letterkenny, for instance, all the people I see walking are the people of color because
Mm.
just they can't afford cars,
Mm.
and yet everybody says how well off they are,
Ah,
So there's a whole lot of things. I think that the basic, if you want to boil it down to answer your question, is if your life isn't going great, you always need to blame somebody else for it, and
ah.
who better than some foreigner?
Yeah, that's right. Or not necessarily foreigner, because a lot of the trouble occurred in Harryville, an area called Harryville. And if you
Yeah,
remember your Harryville history,
yeah, remember
that was a
that?
place a couple of decades ago where loyalist crowds sort of surrounded the entrance to a church where people were going to mass in the evening, not in the morning, because
Yeah,
they're
yeah,
a bit early to riot in the morning. But I mean, the most vile stuff was
yeah,
shouted at them. And actually, that
yeah,
Catholic community no longer exists there, and the church is flattened.
yeah,
They've built over it. So in a way, they've won
yeah,
there. There are some people, and I think there's a truth in it,
yeah,
that as you say, they look for people to blame for their troubles. And if they might be Catholics, or in this case, they would be immigrants. I think there are a couple of other factors,
mm,
though. One of them is always with this, it's the poor. You know, poverty is at the heart of it. There were
yeah,
very few doctors, very few consultants, very few engineers, very few uh, dentists out rioting in Ballymena or Portadown or Larne over the weekend. I would say that safely. There wasn't a single professional person or middle
yeah,
class person. It also was the attacks were by young people. You look at the TV, you can see there the guys
yeah,
just went around, and that brings me to a thing that I often think. Rioting is a very exciting thing, even to watch, and certainly in the flesh, it's a
yeah,
really exciting thing. And if you're a young fella of 16, 17, 18, it must be doubly exciting because there's a risk of being
yeah,
caught, and you can really make your rock hit the police Land Rover and so on. Now, I'm not excusing it, but I'm just saying we need to take all those things into account as well, as saying these people are just looking for somebody to be a scapegoat for all their woes. Um, it's
absolutely.
complicated by
But isn't it?
yeah. Go ahead, Pat.
No, Gordon Lyons, the DUP
Yes.
guy.
Yeah.
I remember what Michelle O'Neill said he should be or considering his position.
Uh-huh.
He pointed out that these people had been housed in Lyons, community or not sports centre.
Yeah.
I know, and basically on some sort of social media post, and then of course it was attacked.
Uh-huh. What
Now
What do
Michelle
you
O'Neill
think?
said that he had basically set up. He said, now in fairness to him, he says that was not his intention whatsoever. He,
Uh-huh.
he, he said he was trying to make sure that people could had a place to go type thing. But anyway,
Uh-huh.
Jude, it's
Well,
it,
let's move on.
it has exposed. Say
Say that,
again.
Pat.
What'd you say?
Say that again.
No, and it sort of exposed a few fissures at cabinet level in Northern Ireland.
Uh-huh.
So it's
Yeah.
going to be
Yeah.
very interesting to see.
Uh-huh.
They're not happy.
All right. Well, Gordon Lyons says, as a local MLA for the area, neither I nor my DUP council colleagues were made aware or consulted on this decision until late this afternoon. Uh, I think that's a bit of a distraction, really, as to whether he was clued in it. The fact is that he put it up on his Facebook, I think, that these people had been moved to the leisure centre. And lo and behold, another couple of hours later, now he says the leisure centre was attacked. Now he says that that was common knowledge, that it was out in the open, that people knew before he mentioned it. Um, I would have to say
Yeah,
that that may well be true, but the fact that he, as communities minister, mentioned it on his Facebook, that's a hell of a platform and a megaphone to use. They also, I'm interested in your views on this, Pat, as a student of language. John O'Dowd and Michelle O'Neill, I think, both mentioned the way he talked, Gordon Lyons talked about these people who are immigrants and seeking refuge, that he referred to them as these individuals. And they both took that as
Yeah.
being sort of, I don't know, certainly not sufficiently sympathetic with the plight of these people. What were your, do you think that a
Uh,
fair enough judgment or not?
Jude, I think the word is pejorative. It's shading it. These individuals, you can nearly, when you can say it, if you say it out loud, you can see a certain tone there.
Mm, mm,
When you refer to, if you say if you refer to we have an immigrant community that needs looking after, needs protection, that's a totally different way. But when you refer to them as these individuals, it's almost singling them out. They're not of us. They're not a
mm, mm.
part of our community.
It's a phrase
Yeah, they're. Uh,
the people use, you in other circumstances they use and say there's just a few individuals who are ruining it for everybody else. That's almost a
else,
cliche.
yeah,
I sort
yeah.
of cast when
Uh,
individuals, a slightly darker, literally and metaphorically, than
mhm.
to say this community or these people. Anyway, do you think that Gordon Lyons is going to be
Yeah.
pressured into having to resign?
Not at all, Jude. No, not
Huh?
at all. I don't think so. Anyway,
Well,
like I heard him on yesterday, very defiant. He sort of said, like, as
uh,
you said, he said it was well known they're already there. Why blame him? And I suppose he's got a point. But Jude, put it like this, his contribution didn't help. That's for certain.
for sure, for sure. I think you're right. I think he'll write it out. I don't think I had a discussion with somebody about this, and they were saying, "Oh, that he'll actually welcome the publicity and it'll go down well with his followers." I don't think that's the case. Well, it might do, but I think more than that, he'll be seen as damaged. The idea that he might have said something that even approached racism sounds, a lot of people will find that very distasteful.
But he's going to deny that. He's going to say this is that's sort of how many angels dancing on the head of a pin that he used language that someone else thinks is pejorative. He didn't mean it that way, that's an interpretation. That it's a malign interpretation of what he said. He's going to come out with that, and Jude, it's not a resigning matter, in a sense that he didn't say anything these individuals should be run out of our country or anything like that. So he's going to get away with it.
You think so? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
You're probably right, Pat. I think we need to keep in mind, though, the fact that it is, I'm sure it's true, that he didn't break the news, and therefore open the
Well,
door for racist riots. But he did amplify it, I think. In other words, if somebody else posts it up on the internet, you might or you might not get it. If Gordon Lyons puts it up, I think people pay a lot more attention to that, and a lot more of them would read what he had said. So.
but Judy, here before we leave this topic, guys, you know the bigger sort of elephant in the room is are in loyalist communities as anyone who's different welcome. Catholics aren't allowed in, mixed marriages aren't allowed in, blacks don't seem to be allowed in, foreigners don't seem to be allowed in. There seems to be an intolerance every which way, and to anybody that's not of our white
Yeah.
Protestant WASP
Uh,
background.
uh,
Judy,
yeah. But
maybe some anthropologist or somebody who should have a good look at the Protestant community and say, why is it? By the way, a lot of people go into Catholic communities, black people, Indians, whatever, Polish, Lithuanian,
mhm.
very little bother. But the minute they get to a Protestant community, they're suddenly rioting. And but it's not the first time.
Well, that's true. That's absolutely true. And I think you're right that there is a tendency for, now keep in mind that you're talking about Protestant working class people. The middle
Yeah,
classes seem to override that, or, I mean, if they're prejudiced,
yeah.
they're not out
That,
rioting for sure.
so no, that's I'm not talking about unionist communities. I'm talking about loyalist communities.
Oh yeah. Well, I think that term unionist and loyalist. I know what it means, but I think it's an unnecessary sort of distinction. You see, the union, they're unionists. What they are. What's the difference in their
Yeah.
allegiance? I mean, the
No,
allegiance is
Judah, no,
exactly the
I
same.
disagree with you there. There's a union. I know unions who are very, what would you say? very decent, tolerant sort of people,
Yeah.
welcoming and so on.
Yes,
This
I
is true.
agree.
This
I
is
do too, Pat. But I
we're
also know some
loyal.
of them that are.
Yeah,
I also know some of them that are bigots.
yeah, of course they are.
So
The
the
loyalists
term
are these are the
unionist.
people running around with their UVF flags and murals on the wall and all that sort of stuff. I
Uh,
think there's a difference.
well, I sort of agree with you, but I think it's a term they use to say not only are these people unionists, but they're working class. That essentially is it.
Yeah,
Loyalists live in council
yeah,
estates. Unionists live
yeah.
more likely in suburbia or wherever. Uh, you're not
Wherever, yeah.
actually
There's no one truth in
identifying.
that too. Yeah,
So I think it sort of reeks a wee bit of classism, that the unionists sort of
yeah,
clutch their pearls and draw their skirt up away from these nasty people who are
yeah,
loyalists. We have nothing to do with them. They're really bad. Um,
yeah.
yeah, do you think if we kick this to death enough?
I
Gordon,
kicked this to death now.
but it really was a very shocking, and it got huge coverage everywhere, even
Yeah,
in the States and other countries,
yeah,
because of what has happened. So clearly, other people see it as a pretty important item. Now, there's a very similar
yeah.
sort of situation in Los Angeles. So, how would you identify the main distinctions? There are people there who are rioting, and they're being resisted by the forces of law and order. Is that the same thing, really?
No, I don't think it is. See what's happening in America is deliberate stirring of the pot by a president who wants to, is basically is straight out of Hitler's playbook. Again, identify an enemy, the other. You know, like Jude, uh, Gavin Newsom, the governor of California,
Uh-huh.
said ICE as the some of the stuff that's going on with ICE is simply unacceptable. Now, a court ruled that Trump didn't have any authority to send a National Guard, but that was overruled by a court of appeal,
That's
and
right.
it's on hold now. But Jude, it's all the hallmarks of Trump trying to appeal to his base. I am tough on law and order, and I'm going to get these people out. And in other words, he was described as possibly a paedophile by Elon Musk on a Friday morning, and he sends in the troops a couple of days later, and suddenly everybody forgets about what's going on. Due to this distraction by Trump, and it's creating major, major problems. But I can there's going to what is it this week, Jude? There's something like I think it's 20, 40. There's 42 protests planned, against ICE and across, I think 21 states. Should America could start erupting very quickly. This is definitely manufactured. By the way, one side issue. Alex Padilla is a Democratic
Yes.
senator. He was at a meeting somewhere in California, and what they call her, Christine Nome, or whatever her name is, the Homeland Security, and he asked her a question and was bundled out and actually forced to the ground, handcuffed by FBI and Homeland Security agents. Dude, I think a senator in America is absolute. Remember Ted Kennedy, Senator Ted Kennedy. If they can do this to a senator, you sort of ask yourself, where is America headed? And there's big question marks got to be asked about the whole authoritarianism. Trump this weekend is having he's on his 79th birthday, he's having a big military parade. Now, the pretext is it's the 250th anniversary of the American Army or some bloody thing. But really, it's been organized for his birthday. And apparently there's something like 2,000 protests about that. No king here type thing, I think it's called.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
Jude, America's going through a lot of stuff right now. And I think what happening in Ballymena is, I know it's comparing oranges and apples, not oranges and oranges.
Well, there's civil unrest in both, and there's people discontent with the way things are. But you're right. I mean, this is a gigantic. It's like comparing a pygmy to a giant. Um, I think this is very serious. Trump is trying to make ordinary the idea of sending in National Guards, and at his beck and
Yeah,
call, whereas the tradition is that it's the governor of the state, and they very
no,
rarely call them in. And we all remember now
yeah,
Kent University, where the four students were shot. But I honestly think that Trump is pushing it so that the idea of him sending in troops becomes ordinary. And the idea of people being, as
Yeah,
you say, a senator being bundled to the ground in handcuffs for asking a question. You know, you get used to, people get used to stuff. The question is, how will they react? Um, think back to 1972, Pat, and Bloody Sunday.
yeah,
What was it that caused the deaths of those people? The parachute regiment was sent in, notoriously tough. Trump's talking about sending in the Marines, notoriously tough. Now, if they do go in, they're taught, and the National Guard as well. They're taught, they're schooled in shooting at people and killing them. So if that
mm,
happens, what will the reaction be? Will people say, "Oh, geez, I'm not going to demonstrate I could get shot dead," or will they, as happened
mm.
with Bloody Sunday, will the ranks of those who say, "I'm going to resist this. This isn't going to happen in my town," will the ranks of those who oppose Trump swell and overcome him, and you'll be on the verge of a civil war of some kind? Do you think? Is that
Yeah.
exactly?
Well, Jude, I was involved on social media yesterday. There's a guy. I think he's Canadian type American. If you know, I think he alternates between the two places. And as support for Trump, as I said to him, no, no, my problem with you is basically Trump could shoot a classroom of kids and then rape their mothers. And you would say, well, that's okay. Trump, no, he's making America great again. Dude, it's a whole cult. His people, he can do no wrong, and that's a fact. It's unbelievable. They, I think because Jude, I think he's reflecting a lot of their ideology. He's trying to make America white again. You know what we were talking about earlier, like Ballymena in the 1970s. He's appealing to white voters. Get these blacks and Jude, they're not throwing out Danish people or whatever. They're concentrating on brown skinned people. They're raiding farms in California where fruit pickers are. They're raiding factories, and by the way, they're literally ramming cars where they think people, are migrants. Dude, that has got to be totally illegal. They're ramming cars. They're using sledgehammers to put on windows. There is no the privacy of a house means nothing. Dude, it is straight out of Hitler's playbook. It is definitely out of playbook. Gavin Newsom and Alex Padilla and these people are saying what's happening now is a massive escalation that ICE was supposed to be brought in to protect America. Yeah. He says now it's actually scaring the shit out of America that a lot, even ordinary white, I know, total citizens, people who've been there third generation, like, but if you're Puerto Rican and you have brown skin, you can be stopped in the street even though you're third or fourth generation American.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. The ICE people are supposed to be only investigating people who are immigrants and committed crimes. I think that's the only sort of legal
Yeah,
situation where you'd say there is a case for deportation. We have to look into it. They are going into places where they know there's undocumented immigrants, and they're hauling them off. And I'd be very
yeah,
surprised if that's not against the law. I'm also kind of surprised that given that the Democratic Party really needs something to, they need a hook of some kind to haul themselves up out of the abyss that they're in, that they don't light on this and
yeah.
produce the facts and figures and laws which Trump is breaking and say we can't have a president doing this kind of thing. I really, if
Yeah. Well,
you're going to have
Newsom,
an
I think,
authority,
I think Newsom is starting to get a national profile, and he might become the leader of the Democrats because Jesus, they badly need it. Bernie Sanders is too old. Alexa Cortez or Ocasio or whatever her name is, she's black or Hispanic. No,
I'm
America
not
is.
quite sure how to help you with
Alexa,
that.
stop. She is. She's not gonna be
it's Alexa
a
bothering you there.
vote getter. But exactly. I used that name, and guess what came on? But hey, Jude, it's going to be very. I think Gavin Newsom is now getting a national profile, and that's going to help.
Yeah, I saw a speech of his. I don't know, was it on Facebook or something? It went on for about 10 minutes. I must say, he
Yeah,
looked very well. And again, I've always said this, that how a politician looks is very important. He looked like an intelligent, well-informed, strong-minded guy who knew what he was talking about. I
yeah,
must say, like you, I was very impressed by him. And you would hope that he or somebody else very like him would emerge in the Democratic Party because the Democratic Party are absolutely useless. They don't seem to. Where are the people who are
Yeah,
standing up and saying Trump sending in these ICE squads to burst into people's homes is ridiculous and it's illegal? They sort of accept it and say
yeah.
it's bad. Um,
But no, something that Christy Nome, and I can't remember the Attorney General. She's another Barbie doll.
yeah.
She, they came on and said they're doubling down. We have removed 3,000 criminals from America. And so on, and they're saying, and it's we're keeping America safe. This President Trump is delivering on his promise. And Jude, I'm thinking of your guy that I was engaged with yesterday. He Jude, he loves it that these getting out these drug gangs and all. It's been portrayed as a strong man looking after his people. Nobody Paisley, Paisley went out to the European Union and called the Pope the Antichrist and all the rest. And I remember saying to somebody one time, "Geez, that there?" He says, and other guys says, "Pat, he doesn't give a shit what Europe thinks of him, what the UK thinks of him." He says, "Back home in Ballymena, that's playing to the gallery. That means he tops the poll at the next election."
Aye, that's right. That's right for sure. I've just thought of this, and I don't want to distract us now, but I just had a thought about Ballymena. There's a guy who does blogs for me, and he's done a whole series of blogs, and I think he used to live in Ballymena. Because he did a blog and he said that where the rioting started, or the most of it was the first night, was very close, almost exactly where he lived. Now, I gather he's a Catholic
Yeah,
or Catholic background, but he said that there's a lot of Romanians in Ballymena, but he says there's a group called Romani who are actually sort of out of
yeah,
control, and that the Romanian community have no time for them, hate them, but they're afraid of them. That these guys, and I heard stuff on the radio this
yeah.
morning suggesting that these guys are involved in prostitution, drug dealing, all sorts of stuff. Do you think is that likely to be
Yeah.
true, or is that just an effort to kind of smear
Yeah,
things?
well, a member of my family worked with a Romanian guy some years back, and he said the same. He warned the person I know is to stay away from them, and he was Romanian. He says stay away from the Romans. He says they are bad people. Now he warned the person I knew and warned them very seriously. And by the way, he made much the same. He says they're anti drug dealing, they're anti prostitution, they're anti gangsters. These are the people. Jude. I remember the famous case in the Pennyburn Chapel in Derry. There used to be two women standing outside mass on a Sunday, with their wee bags begging, and
Mm,
so on. And I remember this discussion one day on a radio foil, and the guy came on. He says, "Like I want to tell someone." He says, "Anybody goes to mass in Pennyburn Church," he says, "will notice the two ladies," and he says they made quite a lot of money. He says because everybody felt sorry for them. He says, well after everybody had gone, he says they went up. He says up, about half a mile up the road. He says where they were collected by a guy in a Mercedes. So like it was professional begging.
yeah, yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of that, and they do talk a lot about gang masters and so on. Although I have I mean, this is a
Yeah,
slightly side issue. You're thinking about Pennyburn Church. I have a thing that if there's somebody begging, right, and you're thinking of giving them money, I'm in favor of not running over in your mind, is this person deserving of my money? They might spend it on drink, might spend it on
uh,
drugs, they might be passing it to a gang
that's
master,
exactly
whatever. Just give the bloody money, or else don't give it. One of the two.
absolute. I
I sort
agree
of hate
totally.
people going and saying, "Oh no, they're not going to hoodwink me, they'll not separate me from my money." I know the
Yeah.
kind these
I
boys
mean,
are.
just one thing you said a couple of years ago. In fact, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I went to a car wash not too far from where I'm living now. It
Mhm.
was a bitterly cold day, and I mean butter. I remember sitting in the car, but there was 3 or 4 of these young fellas, and they were washing my car. They had only on sort of tracksuit bottoms, and they were using cold water. They were Romanian, and I presume they were there at the behest of a gang boss. And dude, they must have been freezing. I had they even had on proper wet gear, and I remember thinking, "This is exploitation." And I remember thinking, I should have went to the Guardian say, "Come on, what's going on here? You guys should be up here checking Jude." It was cruel. It actually was cruel. It was a bitterly cold day, and they were using cold water to wash a car, and
Mhm.
hoses and all the rest of it, and they
Mhm.
must have been soaked, Jude. So
Yeah.
and I remember thinking, "Hey, this is an immigrant getting exploited big time."
I'm sure there's quite a bit of that. But tell us this, Pat.
Yeah.
If you knew they were being exploited, would you have brought your car in to get washed?
No,
You
Judah
wouldn't.
went in there that morning, and I should have copped on. Yeah, now Judah but the only thing about it, going there, maybe that's keeping them on food.
Exactly,
This last couple of
exactly,
years,
Pat. That's my point.
yeah,
That these guys, of
yeah,
course, they're
yeah,
being exploited, but they obviously are doing it because of nothing better. And in a way, of course, you want
yeah,
somebody to stop these gangmasters, but at the same time, these are poor buggers that are trying to eke a living of some kind. And I actually, once again, I'd bring my car in. In fact, there's a very similar situation just up the road from
yeah,
me, where there's a bunch of young guys that come out, and girls too, or women, young women. But
yeah,
I
yeah,
have this thing about making distinctions between the worthy poor and the unworthy poor. There's a, I don't know if you've ever
yeah.
seen, it's the stage version of My Fair Lady, Pygmalion by George
Uh,
Bernard Shaw,
yeah.
and
George Bernard Shaw.
it's really good. There's a line in it where the professor, whatever his name is, um, he starts talking to the father of the girl who's the central character, uh, and the father of the girl offers to sell his
Yeah,
daughter to the professor. Uh, and, the professor's
yeah,
appalled. And he says, "Have you no principles, man?" And the guy says, "I am a poor man, sir. I can't afford principles." Which I thought there was a lot of truth
yeah,
in.
yeah,
You need to have a reasonable
yeah.
income before you can get too picky about principles. Okay,
Uh,
we're nearly
well,
finished here.
before we go, we better mention Iran, Israel's attack on Iran last
Oh,
night.
geez, yeah, yeah. Is there anything Israel isn't allowed to do now? Either is there any
Yeah.
country they're not allowed to invade?
Oh, they targeted the nuclear program. They assassinated at least what the chief of the Revolutionary Guard. They
Yep.
assassinated the chief of the army. Uh, America has distanced themselves from it. Bollocks, dude, absolute bollocks. Anybody is naive enough to, Israel has gone alone. Dude, what Trump doesn't want to do is American embassies in places like Iraq attacked and so on. And he's trying, but you can bet your life the Israelis have not coordinated and informed the Americans they were going to do it and so on. And if Israel's attacked, you can bet your life America is going to come in behind it and so on. But
Hmm.
anyway, you're dead right. Israel seems to be a law unto itself. Israel is responsible for more fucking problems in the world than it has invaded Lebanon. It's about putting illegal settlements in the West Bank, as starting probably a war with Iran. It invaded a ship on international waters last Sunday night. It seems to be allowed to do whatever, and they're the victim.
Hmm. Hmm.
Always the victim.
Yeah, I think they're
Amazing.
going to they'll run out of sympathy. I think they have run out of sympathy throughout the world, throughout the half sensible world. But the snag is, somebody says, actually, Israel is a sort of a colony, a very bolshy colony of the US, and they're able to do what they can do
Yeah.
because of the US
No,
giving
no, no,
them,
here, hold on. Let me kind of correct you there. The,
yeah.
the U.S. is a colony of Israel.
Well, that's one way of putting it, all right. They seem to
Yeah.
dance to its tune. But do you not think Trump, if he wanted to, would say this is against the interests of American people? It won't make America great again, so forget it. Or do you believe that they're joined at the hip and
No, Trump doesn't want wars, but what were they bombing Yemen or somewhere there recently? Like Trump, Trump. This thing about Trump not want, Trump is amoral. Like he gives the go ahead for the execution of what do you call it, the Iranian general. He's bombing and so. He's up to his eyeballs and sort of stuff. I don't buy for a second that he's some sort of pacifist. That's a bollocks. That's
you're
absolute
probably
rubbish.
right.
And I don't buy either APAC has bought American politicians. They're scared. One woman, I can't remember her name now. She gave something like 100 million to.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, yes, I saw that. Okay, Pat, we're out of time. I hope we've shed some light on some of the problems around the
Yeah,
world. Whether or not that will change anything is another matter entirely. But do you
yeah,
think, final question, do you think there's going to be more rioting over the weekend in Ballymena? Yes, no.
probably.
I
Yes.
I agree. Depends on the weather. Depends on the weather. Okay, Pat.